5, 4, 3, hands on keys, turn. Infidel defilers. They shall all drown in lakes of blood. Now they will know why they are afraid of the dark. Now they will know why they fear the night. That is Thulsa Doom. Greetings and felicitations. This is Mike Haspel, and we're launching into part 5 of Conan the Barbarian. This is the last episode that's going to have to do with the film. In part 6, we're going to talk about the legacy of Conan the Barbarian and where it kind of like just left off with up to present day. You know, all the things that it influenced, all the other the stuff that happened that's going to come into play. Well, hopefully soon. We'll see. So when we left off with Conan, he had been resurrected by Valeria's actions, and healed by the wizard, and kind of had refound his strength. And they were, he and Valeria and Subutai were sitting around contemplating what they were going to do next. And what they're going to do next is infiltrate the Mountain of Power, Thulsa Doom's Mountain of Power, and try to steal the princess back, which is their actual mission. That's what they're supposed to be doing, that King Osric hired them to do. So there's an interesting thing at this point, because they go, okay, the good thieves could sneak in and get the princess and get out, but not vengeful ones. And Subutai says, you know, we go and just get the princess, we kill Thulsa Doom another day. And Conan doesn't really answer. He just sits there and continues to sharpen his sword. And one of the interesting things there is that the character, even though he had a purpose before and he had a focus before, his purpose now is he understands that he was put on the earth to kill Thulsa Doom. That is his reason for being, his raison d'etre, as they would say. So that's really all he's concentrating on. He doesn't give them an answer. So it's just interesting, because now we're moving, when you're looking at the hero's journey, we're moving rapidly towards the end. And this would be the part where they seize the boon, or it's sometimes called rescue from without. It's where the hero gets a chance to get the treasure or the boon or the elixir that they were after the whole quest. So, you know, they decide to go into the Mountain of Power. The old man knows that there's like a secret back way through these caves, and that the Mountain of Power is hollow. And so they're just going to go in there and rescue and save the princess. There's a really cool shot of them riding across like a bunch of sand dunes. And this was something I didn't know until I started researching it for this. Those sand dunes are in Almeria, Spain. And that is actually where they filmed Lawrence of Arabia. Not actually on location where, you know, in Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East. They filmed it in Spain. I did not know that. So that's kind of neat. And Conan took advantage of that. So that's really cool. Now, but before they're riding across these sand dunes, they cover themselves in some kind of black and white war paint to kind of break up their outline. And an interesting thing about that was that where they were, the paint was soap-based. And it was very hard to take off and super, super itchy, apparently, according to Sandal Bergman. And there was one night where they made it back to the hotel and there was no water, and they had to sleep in this kind of soapy war paint and everything. But to get back to the film, they infiltrate the Mountain of Power, and This is where we get my favorite piece of music, even though the images that accompany it are, quite frankly, literally hellish. And the piece of music is called, it's actually twofold. It's called The Kitchen and The Orgy. But my favorite piece is The Kitchen. And when they get in there, everything is lit by torches. There's like a red filter on the lens. It looks like hell. There are humans being hung, human carcasses being hung down like cattle. They're being butchered on the ground and everything. And there are these, in the novelization and in the early screenplay, they were supposed to be like troglodytes, like beast men, Neanderthal type creatures. They're not entirely human. And but in the film, they decided not to do that. They're all pretty much just the same big guards that we've been seeing throughout, with kind of masks on their faces, probably so you don't realize it's the same, like 12 guys playing playing all the guards. But they're able to sneak in there and follow. They're making this gigantic stew to feed all these people, and they're dumping all these kind of human body parts into the stew, and it's really vile and, over the top, but that's John Milius for you. And then they go into the orgy part, and there's another part where Subutai calls it kind of paradise. He goes, so this is supposed to be paradise, There's a massive orgy going on, and people come up to this thing and to this gigantic bowl of stew, and the guards are like spooning out kind of big spoonfuls, but it's full of like hands and body parts and stuff like that. And what was interesting about that is, I guess it was filmed in like this giant concrete warehouse, and it was not heated. And they had no hot water, so everybody was like taking cold showers. And they mentioned that everyone was wearing coats right up until the camera started rolling. And then because everybody in there, of course, they're supposed to be having an orgy, so they're all like scantily clad. And it's pretty insane. What's also really, really cool is that when you watch it, is that the camouflage that they're wearing, that body paint stuff, actually does kind of work. Whenever they move into the shadows and stay still, they kind of just disappear. It breaks up their outline really, really well. And it's really cool. And you get this sequence of them kind of just sneaking from like point to point, getting past guards and everything like that to try to get into an advantageous spot to find the princess. And everybody in there is just kind of like in a drugged stupor. They don't really show that, but the princess is clearly drugged. She's just like kind of languidly hanging out by Thulsa Doom's throne. But then we get to see, and like, there's not a whole lot of overt, over the top magic in Conan the Barbarian, but there is a part of it that comes out like right now. So we've gotten the witch, where she transformed and stuff like that. So we saw that. We saw, obviously, the resurrection scene where the wizard, summons or tries to prevent these spirits from claiming Conan's soul, along with Valeria. And then now we get to see Thulsa Doom, and he transforms into a snake. And it's very, very clever how they did this, pre-CGI and everything like that. With CGI nowadays, they probably just show you the entire transformation, and it would probably lose some of its magic. They used some really old school techniques. They had like a mask of James Earl Jones that was just a rubber mask, and they took a snake form and just pushed it kind of against the mask so that his features kind of distended into those of a snake. His lower jaw would extend, all kinds of different stuff like that. And then they just cut away. They cut to like Subutai and Valeria grabbing some candles, and they're setting some of the drapery on fire and stuff like that. Then it cuts back to Thulsa Doom, and now there's like a giant rubber snake head that's there. But it looks really, really good. It still holds up to this day and everything like that. And then they finally cut away to a real snake. And it's a pretty large snake, and it just goes and escapes. They then Subutai essentially attacks the guard that was spooning out all the stew for people, and Conan and he just start taking guards out and everything like that. Rexor and Thorgrim show up, and this is a very important part. It may feel like I'm racing through this, but as I've mentioned before, Conan the Barbarian does not have a lot of dialogue. And from here on out, the film is almost all action. There are two major scenes that are not, but they don't have a whole lot of dialogue. There's only one large dialogue scene coming up. So then Rexor and Thorgrim show up, and they're armed and they're trying to figure out what's going on. People are just being slaughtered because Conan and Subutai are essentially, unopposed. And Rexor, when he sees Conan, he recognizes him, but he recognizes him from the Tree of Woe. This is the guy we crucified a couple of days ago, not from the early raid, at the beginning of the movie when Conan was about 5 or 6 years old. He sees him, and Conan takes this really cool pose, like, bring it, come at me, bro. And Rexor just says, like recognizing him. What's cool about this is that the music starts playing a variant of Anvil of Crom, which is the opening theme song of the film. And it's a reprise of that theme. Basically, things have come full circle. This is the confrontation with Rexor. Conan is facing him on equal ground now. So it's going to get beyond. They cut away. They show Valeria. She captures the princess very easily, just kind of runs up there, smacks her so she won't put up too much resistance. And that's it. It's really great. And they have this great fight between Rexor, Thorgrim, and Conan. And when they talk about this fight, they said it took a long, long time to rehearse because Sven Ole and Ben Davidson, who played, Thorgrim and Rexor, respectively, and Arnold, they don't really pull hits. So, and when you see some of these hits that are coming where Thorgrim is swinging this massive, it's almost comical, the size of his hammer, around, and he winds up knocking down a pillar. And Conan actually shows some wisdom here. Instead of staying and fighting Rexor and Thorgrim, which he's been wanting to do his entire life, he actually takes off. And they show him like carrying the princess, and he and Subutai and Valeria are gone, And this brings us to a part of the hero's journey usually called flight. And it's when the hero has gotten the elixir and they're trying to, there's a couple things that might happen here. One is called, is flight. Another is called refusal of the return. And refusal of the return would be like the hero has gotten his boon, he's gotten the elixir, or and she just doesn't want to go back to the regular world. She's just like, hey, I've gotten what I wanted, but I'm not going to return it to the world. That's called refusal of return. Flight is they've gotten the boon, they've gotten the elixir or whatever, the treasure, or in this case, the princess, and they have to make their escape. And the forces arrayed against them are not just going to let them go. I mean, it's going to be ugly. So, and this is a perfect example of that. So they've gotten the princess, they're riding out, everything is hunky-dory, and Thulsa Doom shows up, and he's back now. He's not, he's not a snake anymore. And that's when he utters the line that I started the podcast with, infidel defilers, they shall all drown in lakes of blood. And it's a pretty good threat when it's coming from Thulsa Doom. He's not one to threaten things idly. So, he does one of the coolest gags in the movie, I think, and it's like really easy trick to do, but he has a snake that he can charm so that the snake becomes like an arrow. It becomes very, very straight and very, very hard. And the way they did it is just so simple. It's just really, really easy. Um, they took a real snake and then kind of just pulled it so that it was straight. And then when the camera cut away, they just had the prop snake in its place. I mean, it's just really, really low tech, super well done. Again, practical effects rule. And he shoots this snake. And unfortunately for everybody, it hits Valeria and she goes down. They're able to ride out of range of Thulsa Doom's bow, and they stop, and Conan's able to pull the snake out. And again, they do the same gag where he's kind of just holding the snake taut. And then as soon as he would have cleared Valeria's body, he lets go of the tail and the snake coils up and he kind of tosses it off camera. And it works brilliantly. It looks really, really cool. And you're just like, wow, you know? So Valeria, unfortunately, is mortally wounded. And in the commentary, Arnold asks a really important question. He's like, hey, how come they couldn't bring Valeria back? Because they brought Conan back. And Milius answers that Conan wasn't actually dead, that he was just mostly dead. And then he seems to imply that Valeria is also poisoned, that the snake poisoned her at the same time. In the novelization, that makes a lot of sense because they actually refer to the snake every time that he does this, that Thulsa Doom does this. They refer to it as a viper. So it kind of makes sense that it also poisoned her when it hit her. So it was like a poisoned arrow, poisoned magic snake arrow. And I think John Milius makes the crack that it's like a sidewinder, like, you know, like a heat seeker or something like that, making a little pun on the whole snake thing. Now, there's some argument that that when Valeria dies here, that's fridging the heroine, that's fridging Valeria. And fridging is a term that comes up that when they take a character, 99% of the time it's a woman, and have her die or kill her off due to basically motivate the male hero into getting revenge or giving him a purpose or something. And a really good recent example of that was in Deadpool 2, where Vanessa essentially is killed and is pretty much out of the whole movie just to give Deadpool more motivation when he really kind of didn't need it. And that happens more often than you'd think. In this case, I don't think this is a case of fridging. And I'm going to defend that by saying that Conan's motivation doesn't change at all. It does take Valeria away. But I think it was foreshadowed pretty heavily when she tells the wizard, whatever price that the gods want, I'll pay it. And obviously it's more of a life for a life. She's trading her life for Conan's. And when she gets hit by the arrow, she actually says that. She says, the wizard, I told him I would pay the gods. That's actually the first thing she says before she's saying that she's growing cold and that she wants Conan to kiss her. So it's pretty grim. It's pretty sad. It's unfortunate because Conan could really use Valeria. And a really good example of just how much of a badass she is. And when they're making their escape out of the Mountain of Power, she's running away from two guards. And she's not running away from them because she's afraid or anything. She's essentially the rear guard. While Conan and Subutai are making their way out, she's kind of just hanging out right in front of these guards. So they're kind of chasing her and she's bringing up the rear. And then two more guards show up in front of her. So she's outnumbered 4-1. And once she realizes that, okay, the odds are now no longer in my favor, she turns around and just dispatches those two guards that were behind her in about 5 seconds. It's actually just unbelievable how quick she does it. And the way she moves is really great. Which is, of course, one of the reasons Milius hired her, is because she was a dancer and could move in a way that was just unbelievable. So what I love about this scene, and it's like Valeria's big moment, is the two other guards have just seen her just waste these two guards behind her. So they're just standing there and they're they're kind of very cautious. She's in a guard pose with her sword, and then she just stops and takes a very casual stance and kind of beats the blade against the palm of her left hand like, well, come on, are we going to stand here all day? Like, what are you waiting for? So they attack her. And yeah, it's a huge mistake. I mean, it's not even funny how quickly she takes these guys out. And regrettably for Sandal Bergman there, I think it was one of the scenes in that Mountain of Power thing. There was a pretty bad accident where she was fighting somebody with this fiberglass sword, and the sword broke and it cut her finger to the bone. Like, I think she lost the tip of one of her fingers because of that. And remember how we were talking about how it's amazing that like people survived on this film? Well, a lot of people got hurt. And so there's a whole ton of injuries that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting. We get a scene where, if you remember, the wizard lived down by the sea because no wind would burn up on the mounds. But Conan builds a pyre for Valeria, and Subutai is down there with a torch and everything. And there's an important scene that comes up because Conan's standing there, over Valeria's body, and he's getting ready to light the pyre, and Subutai is crying. And and the wizard asks him, why are you crying? And Subutai answers, he is Conan, Cimmerian. He won't cry, so I cry for him. And there's been a lot of arguments that this is like a super macho scene, but I would argue, well, since Subutai is crying, I don't see how it's that macho. I mean, it's another male character crying, but it comes from a scene that was actually cut out of the film, where Conan, as a child, is at the wheel of pain, and he promises, he starts crying because of his situation. He's a slave. His parents are dead. He now knows nothing but toil. He's pushing this mill wheel around, and he cries. And he promises himself that is the last time he will ever cry, ever. And at some point, he must have told Subutai this, because Subutai knows this. And that's why he's just like, well, he's Conan, he's Cimmerian, he won't cry. So I cry for him. And it's kind of a message of, like, a brotherhood sharing their pain and their loss. So I thought that was actually pretty cool scene. He then takes the torch and lights the funeral pyre of Valeria. And what's interesting is that even though the wizard's like, hey, no fire will burn up there, massive fire burns, and it's like white hot and everything. The way I interpret this is that the dead, who are very much entities in this film, we know that Mako the wizard converses with them, that he talks to them. And they were all very powerful in their own day. They were titans, they were kings, and I would assume queens, because it's never explained where Conan gets the armor that Valeria is burned in. She's burned into some very polished steel, Valkyrie-looking armor, which is fitting considering what comes next. And it's like the dead and the titans or whatever have accepted Valeria. Like, she's one of them now. And that's why the fire is allowed to burn as brightly as it is. Because every other fire, they're like, this is desecrating our resting place. But this is, hey, we recognize Valeria as a fellow warrior, and she's allowed to join them. So the next day comes up. There's Yasmina is bound to a stone plinth in a very Frank Frazetta, like way. She's just kind of chained up there, and I'm sure it would be incredibly uncomfortable. But she threatens Conan, and she's just like, hey, Thulsa Doom has seen your fires, and he's going to come, and he's going to kill you all, and he's going to come for me. So one of my favorite scenes in the movie comes up at this time. because Conan's sitting there, he's just quiet. He's kind of in a thinker pose. And he's contemplating what she said. And we get a really, really cool scene that unfortunately is only in the director's cut. So I probably should have said this like when we started, but you probably should just watch the director's cut and not the theatrical release, because the director's cut is a much better film. We get what Milius calls the Moby Dick scene. And it's a scene where the hero kind of questions himself and reveals that Conan's a much more complicated character than we thought. And in the Moby Dick scene, there's a scene in Moby Dick where Ahab is kind of contemplating fate and kind of weighing what would have happened if things had gone differently. And it goes something like this. And this is Ahab talking. He's kind of monologuing. What is it? What nameless, inscrutable, unearthly thing is it? What cozening, hidden lord and master, and cruel, remorseless emperor commands me, that against all natural lovings and longings, I so keep pushing and crowding and jamming myself on all the time, recklessly making me ready to do what, in my own proper natural heart, I durst not so much as dare. Is Ahab Ahab? And the Conan the Barbarian version, and bear with me, I'm not going to try to imitate Arnold, but I will try to. It's a conversation between him and Subutai, and they are prepping the mounds. They're cutting steaks and laying booby traps and all this stuff. And Conan, there's a wind blowing, and it's a nice, pleasant breeze. And Conan actually stops chopping one of these spikes to kind of take in, stop and smell the flowers, kind of. And what I think is kind of is humorous in a dark way, and is that Yasmina is still chained to the plinth like the entire time that they're talking. They've kind of just forgotten her there. And Conan says, I remember days like this. When my father took me to the forest, we ate wild blueberries. More than 20 years ago. I was just a boy, or 4 or 5. The leaves were so dark and green then. The grass smelled sweet with the spring wind. Almost 20 years of pitiless cumber. No rest, no sleep like other men. And yet the spring wind blows, Subutai. Have you ever felt such a wind? And Subutai answers, they blow where I live too, in the north of every man's heart. And Conan, it's never too late, Subutai. Subutai, no, it would only lead me back here another day, and in even worse company. Conan, for us, there is no spring, just the wind that smells fresh before the storm. And that last line means so much to me. And I'm kind of upset that it wasn't in the theatrical cut, because it's like I think it would be the second most famous line from the film. The for us, there is no spring, just the wind that smells fresh before the storm. It's like they're not allowed to stop. They're not allowed to quit. They're the heroes in this tale, and you have to go until the bitter end, no matter how hard the road gets. And there is no stopping. You can't smell the flowers. You can't stop. Not if you're going to get to the end. And I think there's a really solid message there. And unfortunately, they wound up cutting that scene. I don't really know why. Maybe because of pacing, because it was like right after Valeria's funeral, and kind of shows them just taking in life. But to me, that makes a lot of sense, because when you're living a life like Conan and Subutai, where you don't know where your next meal is coming from, where you don't know if you might live the night, you're going to take every chance you can where something is not oppressive or horrible. You're going to take that in and try to enjoy that little moment. And so that brings us after that. The wizard has gone, and there's actually a pretty cool scene where the wizard is clambering up, and he's got all these armor and weapons and everything. And they go, hey, where'd you get all this? And he says, the dead. The gods are pleased with you. The dead, they will watch the battle. And Conan asks the important question. Are they going to help? And he goes, no. And he utters like one of the best Conan lines. He's like, well, then tell them to stay out of the way, which of course foreshadows something that's coming up. But we get my favorite sequence in the movie, the Battle of the Mounds. And it has some of the greatest music in there and everything. And this, in the hero's journey, is usually, it's sometimes called the return or the crossing the third threshold. If you're dealing with, kind of a 4-act thing, it might be the third threshold if you're only doing a 3-act structure. But this is where push comes to shove. This is the hero has to do everything that they possibly can. The forces arrayed against them are going to do one last final push to destroy them. And you're wrapping up in a film. This is usually like the last maybe 20 minutes. Usually doesn't last longer than that. It's the third act. So there is some truly amazing cinematography here. They get this really long lens. You can see Subutai in the foreground, and then you can see Thulsa Doom's riders, their cavalry, approaching the mounds. And it's really an amazing shot. It's really, really good. I don't think Milius gets enough credit for it. It's very, very fantastic. But he has this cavalry charge, and then overlaid over that is this completely epic music with, choir singing and all kinds of stuff. And the music kind of dies down, and Conan sits there, and it's the only time he prays to Crom, his god, in the entire movie. Now, we've heard him utter his god's name when he saw like the witch, and when he's down in the Atlantean tomb, he'll just say Crom. But he uses it almost like an epithet. It's not a prayer per se, But here is an overt prayer to Crom. And this scene has been like reused in some variants. The most obvious one I can think of is in the 13th Warrior. Right before the battle, we have the Arabic hero pray right before the battle. But it's a very similar prayer, except for the very end. So Conan prays to Crom, and I won't try to read the whole thing, but essentially, paraphrasing it, he says that, no one will remember what happens. It doesn't matter who fought here. All that matters is that 2 stood against many. And then he asks him, he says, valor pleases you, Crom. So grant me one wish. Grant me revenge. And then here's where this prayer changes, where it's purely Conan. He goes, and if you do not listen, then the hell with you. Which just, and Crom, we already know, is like an unfeeling, uncaring god. And Conan doesn't even care anymore. He's just like, you know what? This is my last shot. If you're going to help me, help me. If not, then forget it. And this entire sequence is kind of inspired by the film, the Akira Kurosawa film, The Seven Samurai, which we've kind of seen hints in Mako's performance. We've seen a couple of other things, but this is pretty overt that it comes from these guys. And we get a pretty awesome cavalry attack on these mounds with Subutai and Conan defending. And they've got the whole place booby-trapped. They've got pits. They've got spikes. They've got all kinds of everything. And there were a lot of injuries here, apparently. They actually tell stories of stuntmen getting knocked off a horse or something, getting 15, walking away to the aid station that they had set up, getting 15 or 20 stitches, and then throwing their costume back on and jumping back in the saddle and doing more stunts. It's absolutely insane. It took 10 days to film. They built a scale model of the thing to choreograph how everything was going to work. The stunt coordinator on this was Terry Leonard. He's a legend. And you've been admiring his work probably your entire life. This guy is a stuntman. He is anytime you see like the most epic stunt in Raiders of the Lost Ark, the truck scene, that was Terry Leonard. So he was the stunt coordinator on this. He had just fresh off of Raiders, I believe, right after they had finished Raiders. And there's the second best stunt in the movie during this sequence. There's a horse, Rexor sees Conan. Conan's kind of been knocked down. He's a little discombobulated, and Rexor sees him and charges his horse at him. And in what might be considered an unchivalrous move, Conan, instead of attacking the rider, chops the front legs of the horse off. Now, you don't see this, it's implied. You see him kneel down and swing the sword, and then you just see the horse take a header, and it looks really, really bad. Now, on the commentary, Milius assures us that none of the animals were hurt in making the movie, only the stuntmen were hurt. But it is really, really bad. I mean, it looks really bad. The rider just goes right over the head of the horse, and they say in the commentary he wound up going to the hospital or something. And it is the second best stunt only because the high fall, when we were talking about Thulsa Doom calling, the woman off the cliff, where he's like, "Come to me, my child," and that was a stunt woman, Corey Jensen, and when she jumped and we saw her hit, that was she jumped, I think it was 180 some odd feet, and if I remember correctly, it might still be the woman's high fall world record for a stunt. It's it still takes my breath away, but when you're watching the Battle of the Mounds, if you watch it again, keep your eye out for that Rexor thing. It's impossible to miss. It is extremely violent in the way this horse goes down, and I was just like, wow, they would never have been allowed to do that nowadays. That's kind of old Hollywood, and filming in Spain, I suspect they got away with quite a lot. So Conan gets into a battle with Rexor, and they're using actual real swords here. And you can kind of tell in the strain that's being put on their arms. But these are, actual steel on steel swords that they're banging away at. Granted, it's choreographed, but these guys are not, it doesn't look like they're pulling. I mean, when they hit, there's real impact there and everything. And, Conan gets knocked down. It looks like Rexor has got him. And then just as Rexor is coming down with his father's sword, Rexor is actually wielding the sword that we saw forged at the beginning of the movie by Conan's father. So it's pretty symbolic. It's very epic. He comes down to kill Conan, and a sword blocks his stroke out of nowhere. And then the sword whips him and hits him in the eyes and blinds him. And Conan turns around to see what happens, and Valeria is standing there, fulfilling her promise, because she said, if I were dead and you were still fighting, I would come back from the pit of hell to fight at your side. And she fulfilled her promise, and she saves Conan, and she utters her catchphrase, "Do you want to live forever?" Which kind of in that situation kind of doesn't make a lot of sense, but that is Valeria's catchphrase, which I think is taken from Frederick the Great. I think he's the one who originally said that line, or "Rascals, do you want to live forever?" or something like that. And he wound up suffering a pretty bad defeat because his men were retreating, and that's why he said that. But she says that. Conan gets a second chance because of Valeria, and does away with Rexor. Now, Doom is the only survivor. He goes to ride away, but before he leaves, Yasmina calls out to him, and she's like, "My lord, don't leave me. Don't leave me here." And he pulls out the snake that we saw him kill Valeria with. It's not the same snake, but it's the same the same magic that he's using. And he pulls out this snake and tries to kill her with it, but Subutai is able to jump in the way and block the snake with a shield. Also, Mako is all in armor. The wizard is all armored up, and he actually does take part in the battle. He kills at least one guy that we actually see, a guy who stabs Subutai in the leg. In the novelization, the wizard, and I'm really glad they didn't do this in the movie, because it would have pushed it into the cheese realm a little too much. But in the novelization, he actually has a javelin that he throws, and it automatically returns to his hand. So they might have been able to pull it off, like something like Thor and Mjolnir, but I'm thinking in 1980 when they were filming this, or I don't think it would have come off looking really good. But what's interesting about this part is that when he fires the arrow at her, Yasmina the whole time has been saying, my lord, don't leave me, my lord. And then when she sees him pull out the snake and turn it into an arrow, she yells out, my lord, don't kill me. And then when he fires the arrow, her last words before Subutai stops the snake is father. And it kind of shows that the spell is broken. Now, whether or not Thulsa Doom had her under a literal, real spell, I don't think so. But now she sees that she's been betrayed by what she thought was her god. So you probably shouldn't scorn her. And what's interesting about this is that, they win the battle. That's pretty much the end of the film. That's where Universal really wanted to kind of end it, but we have to have a closing thing, right? So in the theatrical cut, Conan sneaks into the Mountain of Power, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about is still the same, only it's just Conan. It's by himself. So in the director's cut, I think the ending is far, far better. And what happens is we get to see the Mountain of Power, and Doom is giving this big overall speech, and he's got all of his followers there, and they're all dressed in these ritualistic white robes, holding kind of flaming candles or tapers. And he's giving a speech about how they're going to burn their way to paradise, they're going to burn their way to emptiness, and this fire is going to light their way to paradise, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a very Jim Jones moment. And it also highlights a turn in Thulsa Doom's mission. And initially, the cult of Set was going out. They were an apocalyptic cult, and they were going out. They were going to kill all the kings and judges, all the influential people in the world. He was going to send his minions out, and they were going to kill them. But now, because he's lost he's lost his lieutenants, he's lost his, remember that Yasmina was supposed to be his wife. So he's lost his wife, he's lost his lieutenants, his plans are in shambles. He is going to burn it all down. And so it's a very Jim Jones kind of cult where they're going to commit mass suicide. At least that's what I interpret this scene as. That's what it looks like to me. And we get an image while he's giving this speech. It cuts away to Yasmina, the princess. And she is there at the Mountain of Power. And the way that she's played by a French actress, Valeria, who unfortunately died in a car crash very young. So that's why she really hasn't shown up in anything else. But the way she's moving is haunting, frankly. It's really, really great. And she's moving through the Mountain of Power, and she just like kind of walks by these guards, and you'll see her kind of walk by a guard, and she's in the foreground, and the guard's kind of like looking at her. Of course, she's not stopped. She used to be Thulsa Doom's wife, so they're not going to stop her. But then in the background, you see Conan come out of the shadows and kill that guard. And you realize that Yasmina, this is her revenge. She is leading Conan right up into the inner sanctum of Thulsa Doom's Mountain of Power, so he can get right up next to him. And it's really, really cool, and I love it in the director's cut much better. In the theatrical cut, we just see Conan kind of just sneak up on like one or two guards and take them out, and it's implied that he just made it up there on his own. But I really like the version with Yasmina, even though it complicates things a little bit. And honestly, that's why Universal didn't like the ending with Yasmina, because it leaves some unanswered questions. It complicates things. It's not just Conan going up there to kill Thulsa Doom. And also, she behaves very strangely. So you have to kind of read into it. And they felt that American audiences wouldn't be up to the challenge. They just wanted to end the film as quickly as possible so they could get Conan into another movie. That's the whole thing, is just end the movie now. We need another showing, within a half hour to make as much money as we can. So, but luckily the director's cut has restored it the way it was supposed to be, with Yasmina leading him back. And when Conan comes up there, he finally comes face to face with Thulsa Doom. And Doom says something along the lines like, "After all this, you've come back to me again, my son." And he implies, he's like, for who's your father if it's not me? And he's kind of right. It's that he's not Conan's biological father, obviously, but he is what created Conan as he is in that moment. It is all due to Thulsa Doom. And so Doom tries to put kind of a glamour on him, like he did to his mother, and arguably like he did to the woman that he lured off the cliff. And he says, when I'm gone, you will have never been. What will you be without me? Essentially, if your purpose, and if Conan's purpose is to be on the earth to kill Thulsa Doom, once he kills Thulsa Doom, what else is there left to do? That was like his purpose. And Conan kind of takes a moment, because it is kind of resounding with him that it makes sense. And the glamour is kind of working. He's kind of a bit hypnotized. You see him go kind of a little slack, and he lowers his sword arm. And then, to use like D&D terms, he saves versus charm, and just takes the broken half of his father's sword and buries it in Thulsa Doom's neck. And I have to jump back really quickly because I forgot to mention this. When he's fighting Rexor, his father's sword actually breaks. And the reason it does is not because it was inferior steel. It's inferior to the Atlantean sword that Conan is using, that he found in the tomb. So even though his father knew the riddle of steel, knew the secret of it, and was a master blacksmith, he wasn't as good as the Atlanteans. And so Conan wins because he has an Atlantean sword, because he and Rexor are fairly evenly matched. And he shatters his father's sword, kills Rexor, and then, and this is pretty important actually, I feel kind of bad I forgot to mention it. He takes the hilt of his sword, of his father's sword, and his Atlantean sword, and he crosses them over his chest. And that was kind of his pit fighter move, is at the end of all of his gladiator battles, he would take the weapons that he fought with and kind of cross them over his chest. And so he does the same thing, kind of hugging himself, crossing them over his chest as a pit fighter, but he does one additional move. He bows his head. And he doesn't do that in the gladiator battles. He bows his head, but what's really important is he's bowing to Valeria, because he's facing her pyre when he does it. And it's actually really, really cool symbolism that, now, all this was for her. And one of the important things is that at Valeria's funeral, he was wearing kind of an emblem of the Wheel of Pain, because that's what he wore as a pit fighter. That was kind of his symbol, was, hey, he came from the Wheel of Pain. He takes that off at Valeria's funeral and puts on the eye of the serpent that she wore around her neck. Now he's wearing it around his neck. And then we get him bowing to Valeria at the end. So it's really, really cool. So jumping back to where he's just taken his father's hilt, the broken sword, and he's stuck it into Thulsa Doom's neck. Thulsa Doom then turns, is kind of facing his entire congregation, which of course are horrified because they're seeing this happen in front of him. And this aspect, and keep in mind the last lines in the movie that are not Thulsa Doom's, that were Conan saying, "Then the hell with you." Like that's the last lines that Conan says. And so all this is really without dialogue. You kind of have to just watch and and figure out what's going on. And it works really, really well. I'm glad they didn't spell everything out. But it takes on a very ritualistic motif here. Because Thulsa Doom falls to his knees, Conan grabs his hair and strikes off his head in front of all his congregation, all of his followers. Then he holds the head up high, showing them, this is it. This is your God. He's dead. Like, you don't have to go through this. Then he tosses the head off the mountain of power. We see it kind of roll down the stairs. All the worshipers of the cult of Doom, they now have these candles that they were going to light themselves on fire with. They walk to this reflecting pool, and not all at once, in a line. It's a procession. In the way that Milius shoots it, he kind of shoots it going from one dissolve to another, a little bit of slow-mo, and it looks very, very religious. And they're just kind of, as they get to the reflecting pool, they toss their candle or taper in there, extinguishing it. And Conan is sitting there, and he's, through that entire thing, he is ritually cleansed of his past. He can now move on. He can now become somebody else. And at this point, this is kind of the end of the hero's journey. He is master of both worlds. He is, he has peaked. He is a different person now. He is a different person than he was at the beginning. He can now go on and create his own destiny because he is no longer tied to the fate of Thulsa Doom. What is really cool about this too, Milius seems to like these kind of ritualistic endings to move on to stuff, because Milius had a hand in writing Apocalypse Now. And if you think about it, Apocalypse Now, even it came out before Conan, obviously, has almost the same ending. So the Doors are playing, this is the end, and it's getting kind of just insane and crazy. And then Willard goes up into Kurtz's hut, and while the other folks are having a ritual where they're doing this whole animal sacrifice with a huge bonfire and everything like that. And they show this bull kind of just being hacked to bits. And that mirrors exactly what Willard is doing. And then, of course, at the end, the followers don't attack Willard. When Willard comes out, you would think that he's killed Kurtz, let's kill him or whatever. But they just look at him and they kneel and they put down their weapons, and he just walks right through them. And that's essentially what happens at the end of Conan the Barbarian. He has killed Thulsa Doom right in front of all their followers. The followers they outnumber him about 1,000 to 1. They could take him out, but they don't. They throw their fire into the reflecting pool, and they, kind of just let him go. And what's interesting is that he's sitting there thinking, again, in the thinker pose that Milius likes to put him in. And Yasmina is on the other side of the pool. And she comes around to meet him. And then when he's coming down the stairs, she kneels and bows to him because she's looking for another god. And he slew her god, so he's the next logical choice. But Conan just kind of walks right around her. He's not going to put up with her stuff. He walks around her and then holds out his hand so that it's like, hey, you are not a servant. Let's go. Like, we're going to take, he raises her up, and we get the final ending image where Conan goes and he does this awesome hammer throw move where it's Arnold in his peak physical condition doing this hammer throw, and it's majestic. It looks amazing. He's in slow motion. Milius really just played it for everything that it was worth. He does this hammer throw of a brazier and sets the mountain of power on fire. And what was interesting about that, he was supposed to launch this thing through, I guess, one of the balcony windows or whatever, but he missed. It wound up hitting a pillar and falling to the ground, and they were not able to take a second take because the set burnt to the ground right there. So that what you're seeing actually happened. So it's kind of a fitting end to Conan the Barbarian, and he winds up carrying Yasmina back to Zamora, and in the novelization, she knows that her father is dead because she says that a messenger arrived and said that her father is dead, and so she goes back to be queen, and she actually offers Conan a throne, and when in the novelization, he runs into Subutai, and Subutai's like, man, what are you doing here? Like, I thought you'd be king or whatever. Like, didn't she offer you a throne? And Conan answers, if I'm ever to sit on a throne, it'll be one that I've won with my own hand. And of course, that's the prophecy that the witch said. That's what Mako said at the beginning. And we end up with like a little scroll showing Conan sitting on a throne, and it says that one day he became king by his own hand. And that's going to wrap up Conan the Barbarian, the 1982 film by John Milius. In part 6, we're going to talk about the legacy of Conan the Barbarian and dispel maybe some urban legends about Thundar and Masters of the Universe and what the future holds for Conan the Barbarian. So I hope you found this entertaining. I know this episode was a little bit longer, but I didn't want to break it up too much. We've already kind of loitered a little bit too long on Conan the Barbarian. I've got lots of other things to talk about. So thank you for listening. Until next time, keep it clean and green. This is Mike, out. You have been listening to Quantum Froth Dispatches by Michael Haspel. Music and other cues are provided by The Fat Rat. The song you're hearing is Monody, featuring Laura Brem. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit www.patreon.com/QFD. Thank you for listening, and we now return you to your mundane reality.